The lights in the wedding photo studio glowed softly, casting a warm halo around Diep as she stood in front of the ivory backdrop. The white dress she wore wasn't the most luxurious one in the room, but on her, it looked like it was made from sunlight and hope. James adjusted his tie, but his eyes never left her, not even for a second. "Ready?" the photographer asked. James reached out his hand, and Diep placed hers into his. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly. He squeezed gently, trying to pour all the reassurance he could into that single gesture. "We're ready," he said, smiling at her more than at the camera. The camera clicked, capturing their laughter, their closeness, their promise of a shared future. In each frame, James held Diep with a tenderness that made even the photographer pause. To everyone else, they looked like a couple moments away from happily ever after. But only Diep could feel the tension pulsing through James's hand, subtle but unmistakable. And only James knew that Diep's radiant smile was hiding a thin veil of worry. Because outside the studio walls, their world wasn't glowing. A storm had been circling for weeks. James's company was struggling again. Contracts delayed, partners withdrawing without explanation, whispers about John's return spreading like a shadow. James tried to hide it from Diep, afraid she would feel pressured, or worse, unsafe. But Diep wasn't as oblivious as he thought. She had seen the tired eyes he tried to disguise with a smile, the late-night calls he silenced when she approached, the sudden stiffness whenever she mentioned wedding plans. Still, at that moment, under the warm studio lights, Diep leaned into James and rested her head on his shoulder as the photographer snapped another picture. "You look nervous," she whispered. "And you look beautiful," he replied. He said it lightly, but his heart was heavy. As he held her, he wondered whether it was selfish to bring her into a life filled with uncertainty. When would they truly walk down the aisle? When would he be able to give her the peace and security she deserved? Diep looked up at him, her eyes soft but searching, as if she wanted to read the truth hiding behind his smile. James kissed her forehead, hoping she wouldn't see the fear he kept buried. For now, they posed for the camera. For now, they were safe inside this dreamlike studio. But James knew that once they stepped outside, he would have to face the reality waiting for him, and decide whether he could marry her soon, or if love alone could not shield her from the storm closing in. The moment they stepped out of the wedding studio, the warm glow faded. The evening breeze brushed against Diep's cheeks, carrying the soft scent of jasmine from the street vendors nearby. She held the edges of her dress as she walked, carefully, almost thoughtfully, while James carried the garment bag with her chosen gown. He walked slightly ahead of her, but not far, just enough to keep her from noticing the weight on his shoulders. "James," Diep called gently. He stopped. You've been quiet since earlier." James forced a smile. "Just tired. Today was a long day." Diep stepped closer. "You're lying." He blinked, startled, not because he had been caught, but because of how calmly she said it. She wasn't accusing him. She was worried. "What's wrong?" she asked softly. He wanted to say everything. He wanted to empty every fear into her hands, to confess that the company finances were sinking, that John was lurking again, that every investor he tried to keep seemed to slip through his fingers. But he swallowed the truth. "I'm fine, Diep," James repeated, his tone gentle but distant. "Don't think too much." Diep stepped closer. "You're lying." He blinked, startled, not because he had been caught, but because of how calmly she said it. She wasn't accusing him. She was worried. "What's wrong?" she asked softly. He wanted to say everything. He wanted to empty every fear into her hands, to confess that the company finances were sinking, that John was lurking again, that every investor he tried to keep seemed to slip through his fingers. But he swallowed the truth. "I'm fine, Diep," James repeated, his tone gentle but distant. "Don't think too much." Diep lowered her eyes, her fingers curling around her dress. She didn't push further. Not because she believed him, but because she understood him. James always tried to protect her, even from the truth. They walked together to the parking lot. The sky above was turning a shade of quiet purple, the first stars just beginning to blink awake. Diep paused beside the car door. James? Are we still getting married this year? The question hit him like a stone to the chest. Diep wasn't asking out of impatience. She wasn't demanding a deadline. She simply wanted to know if the future they had just pretended for the camera was real. James stared at her, his throat tightening. He hated himself for hesitating. He hated that he couldn't give her an immediate yes. After a long moment, he managed, "Of course we will. I promised, didn't I?" Diep nodded, though her eyes dimmed for a second. Quick, barely noticeable. They drove home in silence, the kind that sits between two people who love each other deeply, but don't know how to reach across the invisible distance forming between them. At the apartment, James helped Diep out of the car. As they walked toward the entrance, she suddenly stopped and tugged on his sleeve. "James," she said quietly, "if something is wrong, don't carry it alone. I'm here." Her voice trembled, but her gaze was steady. For a moment, James felt the urge to tell her everything, every fear, every debt, every problem piling up. Instead, he reached for her hand and kissed it. "I know," he whispered. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't a confession either. Diep smiled faintly, though her heart tightened. James opened the door for her, watching her walk inside before following. That night, as Diep fell asleep beside him, her breathing calm, her hand resting lightly on his chest, James kept his eyes open, staring at the ceiling. He knew the truth he hadn't said aloud. Time wasn't waiting for them, and if he didn't find a solution soon, their dream of walking down the aisle might drift farther and farther out of reach. The next morning began like any other. Sunlight slipping through the curtains, the soft sound of birds outside, and Diep quietly preparing breakfast while humming a tune Nee liked. But James's heart was heavy long before he opened his eyes. His phone buzzed relentlessly on the nightstand. He didn't even need to check the screen to know who it was. Investors, contractors, bank officers. Everyone wanted an answer he didn't yet have. James sat up slowly, pressing his palms against his face. The weight of the entire company, his company, the one he built with so much hope, seemed to crush his ribcage every morning. He wished he could tell Diep. He wished he could let her in. But how could he, when her eyes were always so bright, so trusting, so full of dreams? She poked her head back into the bedroom. "James, breakfast is ready." Her smile was small but warm, the kind that made him wish life could stay peaceful forever, the kind that made hiding the truth feel like the only way to protect her. He forced a smile back. "I'm coming." At the table, Diep poured soup into bowls, the steam rising gently between them. Nee sat on her little chair, swinging her legs and drawing with a marker. For a moment, the scene felt perfect. Almost too perfect. "James," Diep said while adjusting Nee's bib, "yesterday you looked worried. Is work difficult lately?" He froze for half a second, long enough for Diep to notice. "It's just the usual stress," he replied carefully. "Nothing serious." Diep didn't believe him, not for a moment. But she also knew when a man was trying to carry something alone, when his pride and fear wrapped together like a knot too tight to untangle. Later that day, when James headed out for meetings, Diep watched him from the doorway. His shoulders looked tense, his steps heavy. She whispered to herself, "What are you hiding from me, James?" Meanwhile, across the city, James sat in a cold office with 3 investors glaring at him across a polished table. "James, we need guarantees," one man said sharply. "Your recent financial reports are unstable." Another added, "If you don't secure the funds by next month, we will pull out." His heartbeat echoed in his ears. He forced a steady breath. "Give me time. I'm handling it." They exchanged doubtful glances. "Time is exactly what you don't have." Those words stayed with him long after he left the building, echoing through his mind as he drove with trembling hands. He didn't know how long he sat in the car afterward, staring at the steering wheel. Everything was slipping. Everything he built. Everything he wanted to give Diep. And Diep, the woman he loved more than anything, had no idea the man she planned to marry was standing on the edge of collapse. That evening, Diep was sweeping the floor when she found James sitting alone at the kitchen table, still in his work clothes, tie loosened, eyes fixed on nothing. The exhaustion on his face startled her. She walked quietly to him and placed her hand on his shoulder. "James," she said softly, "look at me." He lifted his gaze slowly, and she saw it. The fear, the pressure, the silent suffering he'd been hiding. "Please," Diep whispered, kneeling beside him. "Tell me what's wrong. I can feel it. Every day you drift a little further away." James swallowed hard. No words came out. She took his hand gently. "Are you scared I won't stay if things get hard?" His eyes widened, not in denial, but in truth revealed. Yes, that was exactly what he feared. Diep leaned closer, her voice trembling with emotion. "James, I didn't fall in love with your success. I didn't choose you because of money or status. I chose you because of who you are." Her thumb brushed the back of his hand. "Even if you lose everything, I won't leave." James closed his eyes, fighting a wave of emotion that threatened to break through the walls he'd built. He still didn't tell her everything, not yet, but for the first time he allowed himself to lean into her embrace. And Diep held him tightly, as if she already knew the storm was bigger than he could admit, as if she was silently preparing herself for whatever battle awaited them both. James tightened his grip on Diep's hand as they stepped out of the wedding studio, the late afternoon sun washing their silhouettes in warm gold. She looked small beside him, still blushing from the photographer's teasing. He wanted to take her home, pour her a cup of warm tea, whisper that everything would be all right. But the truth was heavier than the sunlight on his shoulders. He hadn't told her that the company was cracking under pressure. He hadn't told her that someone was tightening a noose around his entire life. And that someone had a name: John. James's phone buzzed with another anonymous message. No words, just a photo. A grainy shot of him and Diep holding hands inside the studio, taken from across the street. He looked around sharply, scanning the road, the parked motorbikes, the quiet alley leading toward the market. A cold sensation crept up his spine. Someone had been watching. "James?" Diep tugged his sleeve. "You look pale." He forced a smile, gently brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Just tired. It's been a long day." But she wasn't convinced. Her fingers wrapped around his wrist, sensing tension he tried to hide. They walked toward the small bakery at the corner, planning to buy sweet buns for her aunt. James stayed a half step behind, letting her walk where he could see everyone around her. Every passing stranger felt like a threat. Every shadow seemed to move. And then, a soft strumming of a guitar drifted toward them. Diep stopped. "Oh, it's him again." The homeless musician was sitting on a carton mat near the lamppost, the same man she had helped once by giving him food and a few dollars. His clothes were shabby, but his eyes were sharp, too sharp for someone pretending to be lost in music. He watched Diep with a strange familiarity, then shifted his gaze to James, measuring him. James placed a protective hand on Diep's back. "We should go," he whispered. But Diep, gentle as always, stepped forward and placed a bun from her bag beside the man. "Eat this, it's fresh." The man nodded slowly, almost gratefully, yet when Diep turned away, James saw his expression shift. Not gratitude, recognition. As if he knew exactly who James was. as if he had been waiting. The phone buzzed again. A text message appeared. "You can't protect her forever." James froze. His breath left him. Someone was closing in. Someone who knew how to reach Diep. Someone willing to use her to break him. Diep noticed his trembling hand. "James, what's wrong?" He swallowed, giving the safest answer he could. "Nothing. Let's get you home." But as they turned the corner, James glanced back one more time. The homeless musician wasn't looking at his guitar anymore. He was watching them walk away, eyes cold, calculating. And in that moment, James understood something terrifying. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. Diep was being watched, and the enemy was far closer than she thought.